Millionaire came daily to his wife's grave, unaware that she was still alive, a heartwarming love story. Hi, my dearest, most precious family. How are you today? Today is a magical day because our queen, our heartbeat, Binta, is celebrating her birthday. Let's fill her day with pure love and heartfelt wishes. She's smiling, just waiting to feel your warmth, a sweet blessing for my family. May peace wrap around you like a gentle hug. May love light every step you take, and may your heart always know joy, no matter what life brings. And for Binta, our birthday star, may your soul glow brighter this year. May love chase you endlessly, and may every dream resting in your heart rise and bloom. Happy birthday, beautiful. If you see the red play button next to your name, click it, comment, and join this beautiful circle. Because here you are not just a viewer, you're family. Let's move forward, hand in hand, with love, grace, and unity. The rain fell in sheets across the windshield of Stevie Mariu's Range Rover as he navigated the winding road back to Manhattan. Lightning fractured the darkening sky, momentarily illuminating the countryside that bordered the highway. He had spent the day at a construction site upstate, reviewing the progress on his latest architectural project, a sustainable community center that promised to revitalize a struggling neighborhood. The project energized him professionally, but as night approached, the familiar emptiness of returning to his vacant penthouse settled in his chest. Through the blur of rain, Stevie noticed hazard lights flashing ahead. As he drew closer, he could make out a sleek black sedan pulled onto the shoulder, steam rising from beneath its hood. A woman stood beside it, her slender figure draped in a tailored coat, shoulders hunched against the downpour. Stevie's instinct was to continue driving. He had a conference call in an hour with clients in Tokyo, but something about the solitary figure made him ease onto the shoulder 20 yards ahead. Grabbing his umbrella from the passenger seat, he stepped out into the deluge. "Need some help?" he called, approaching with measured steps to avoid appearing threatening. The woman turned, and Stevie felt an unexpected jolt, even with rain-soaked. Hair clinging to her face, her beauty was arresting, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that regarded him with a mixture of wariness and relief. Her rich ebony skin gleamed in the faint glow of the hazard lights. "My car overheated," she explained, raising her voice over the storm. "I've called roadside assistance, but they're delayed because of the weather." Stevie extended his umbrella, covering them both. "I'm Stevie Mariu. I promise I'm not a serial killer, just an architect with a dry car 20 yards ahead. You're welcome to wait there instead of getting pneumonia out here." She hesitated, studying his face before the hint of a smile softened her features. "Willa Winter. And I appreciate the offer, but my mother taught me never to get into cars with strangers, no matter how convenient their umbrellas might be." "Smart woman. Your mother." Stevie nodded, raindrops sliding from his dark curls onto his shoulders. "What if we compromise? We can sit in my car with the doors unlocked and you can keep your phone in your hand the entire time. 911 pre-dialed." Gust of wind drove the rain sideways, and Willa's professional resolve crumbled. "Fine, lead the way, Mr. Not a Serial Killer." Inside the warmth of his vehicle, Willa rubbed her chilled hands together. "Thank you. I was beginning to wonder if I'd become part of the landscape out there." "Happy to help," Stevie replied, turning up the heat. He noticed a medical journal on her lap, rescued from her car. "Doctor, medical researcher," she corrected. "I specialize in reproductive health. I was returning from a conference upstate." "Important work," Stevie said, genuine interest warming his voice. "What about you? You mentioned you're an architect." "Yes. Founded Mariu Design Group 8 years ago. We focus on sustainable community spaces." He gestured toward his portfolio on the back seat. "Just came from our newest project site." Willa reached for the portfolio, then paused. "May I, please?" She flipped through renderings of buildings that seemed to emerge organically from their surroundings, structures of glass, reclaimed wood, and living walls. "These are beautiful," she murmured. "There's something almost intimate about them." Stevie shifted in his seat, unexpectedly moved by her observation. Most people commented on the technical innovation or environmental features. Few recognized the emotional dimension he infused into his designs. "That's exactly what I aim for," he admitted. "Buildings shouldn't just be functional. They should create feelings, connections." Their eyes met, and for a suspended moment, the storm outside faded into irrelevance. Willa was the first to look away, returning to the portfolio with newfound interest. "This space," she said, indicating a circular room with floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooking a forest. "What's its purpose?" "It's a meditation room in a cancer treatment center. Patients can watch the seasons change during their healing process." He hesitated, then added, "My father died of leukemia when I was 15. The hospital where he received treatment was all fluorescent lights and beige walls. I always thought he might have found more peace in a space that connected him to the world beyond his illness." Willa's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your father." She closed the portfolio gently. "My research focuses on helping women who struggle with fertility. There's so much shame and isolation in that experience. I always think about how we might create spaces, literal and figurative, where that pain can be acknowledged." "Sounds like we're both in the business of creating safe havens," Stevie observed. The rain drummed against the roof as they fell into conversation about their work, their backgrounds, their perspectives. Willa spoke of growing up between Ghana and America, the daughter of a diplomat father and physician mother. Stevie shared stories of his Maori heritage and New Zealand childhood before his family relocated to the States. Time slipped away unnoticed until Willa's phone buzzed. Roadside, assistance finally arriving. A strange disappointment settled over them both. "They'll tow it to a garage in the city," Willa said after a brief conversation, "but I'll need a ride home." "I can take you," Stevie offered immediately. Willa smiled. "You've already been my knight in shining armor once tonight. I couldn't impose further." "It's no imposition. I'm heading to Manhattan anyway." The tow truck pulled up behind her sedan. While the mechanic assessed her vehicle, Stevie transferred Willa's briefcase and a small overnight bag to his car. The rain had eased to a gentle mist, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and possibility. As they resumed their journey toward the city, a comfortable silence settled between them. Willa gazed out at the highway, streetlights reflecting in the raindrops on the window. "It's strange," she finally said. "I've had colleagues try to set me up on dates for months, and I've declined every time, claiming I'm too busy. Yet here I am, spending an entire evening talking to a stranger I met on the side of the road." "Maybe the universe knew what it was doing," Stevie suggested, a smile playing at his lips. Willa laughed, the sound rich and warm in the confined space. "Are you always this philosophical with women you rescue?" "You're the first I've rescued. Actually, I'm usually quite focused on getting from point A to point B. What made you stop tonight?" Stevie considered the question, unexpectedly moved by its simplicity. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "Something just told me I should." When they reached her brownstone in Brooklyn, Stevie insisted on walking her to the door despite her protests. Under the soft glow of the porch light, she turned to thank him, and he was struck again by her beauty, more profound now that he'd glimpsed the intelligence and passion behind it. "I know this is forward," Stevie said, surprising himself, "but I'd like to see you again, properly, not just because your car broke down." Willa tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "Forward, yes, but I find I don't mind." She reached into her purse and extracted a business card, then hesitated before offering it. "Just to be clear, I rarely do this." "Give out your business card," Stevie teased, accepting it with careful fingers. trust strangers so quickly," she clarified, her voice softening. "There's something about you, Stevie Mariou." He tucked the card into his pocket, already certain he would call her tomorrow. "There's definitely something about you, Willa Winter." As he walked back to his car, Stevie felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. A chance encounter in the rain had somehow altered the trajectory of his carefully ordered life. And for the first time in a long while, the unexpected didn't feel threatening. It felt like promise. Chapter 2. Whirlwind Romance. Stevie called Willa the very next morning. Her voice, slightly husky with sleep, sent an unexpected warmth through him as she agreed to dinner that weekend. What began as a simple meal at an intimate Ghanaian restaurant in Brooklyn, Stevie's careful research, evident in his choice, soon blossomed into a succession of evenings together that stretched into the early hours of morning, neither willing to end their time together. 3 months passed in what felt like both an instant and a lifetime. On a crisp autumn evening, Willa entered her apartment to find it transformed. The scent of jollof rice and grilled tilapia filled the air, and soft lighting illuminated a table set with the traditional kente cloth her mother had sent from Ghana. Stevie had carefully arranged the table following Ghanaian customs, with the symbolic adinkra patterns of the cloth properly oriented and traditional palm wine glasses placed alongside modern wine glasses. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down her briefcase as Stevie emerged from the kitchen, wearing an apron, a smudge of palm oil on his cheek. "I had an early meeting cancelled," he explained, crossing to kiss her, "so I called your mother for her recipes." "You called my mother?" Willa's eyes widened in surprise. Stevie smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression. "I might have gotten her number from your phone while you were sleeping. She was quite helpful once I convinced her I wasn't trying to scam her. She even taught me how to say me do wo properly." Willa's heart melted at hearing him say, "I love you," in Twi. "Your pronunciation is terrible," she teased, "but I appreciate the effort." "There's more," Stevie said, leading her to the small altar she maintained in the corner of her living room, where she kept symbolic items connecting her to her ancestors. He had added fresh water in the traditional bowl and placed a small offering of kola nuts. "Your mother explained the importance of acknowledging your ancestors before significant moments. I wanted to honor your traditions properly," Willa laughed, the sound filling the apartment with warmth. "I can't believe you cooked jollof rice. Most Ghanaians I know can't even get it right the first time." "Who said it was the first time?" Stevie led her to the kitchen where evidence of multiple attempts lined the counter, various pots with rice in varying states of perfection. The first 3 batches were educational experiences. Willa's heart swelled as she surveyed the effort he had undertaken. In the 3 months they had been together, Stevie had shown an uncanny ability to understand what mattered to her without her having to explain. He remembered details from her childhood stories and incorporated them into their shared experiences, creating new memories layered with meaning. Over dinner, Stevie reached across the table to take her hand. "I have something else planned for this weekend." "More surprises?" Willa raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure my heart can take it." "Pack for the beach, casual warm clothes." His eyes held a secret he was clearly enjoying. Friday afternoon found them driving along the coast to a remote cottage perched on cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. The structure was modest but beautifully designed, with walls of glass that erased the boundary between inside and out. "It's one of my early designs," Stevie explained as he unlocked the door. "I built it for a client who wanted a place to disconnect from everything except the ocean." "It's breathtaking," Willa said, moving to the windows where waves crashed against rocks below. "You have a gift for creating spaces that feel like embraces." That evening, they walked along the deserted beach, hands intertwined, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues. The wind carried salt and promises as they spoke of deeper things than they had before. "My father used to say that buildings outlive people," Stevie said, watching the horizon. "That's why architects have a special responsibility. We're creating future memories for people we'll never meet." He paused, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "After he died, I threw myself into drawing buildings. I think I was trying to leave something permanent in a world that suddenly felt so impermanent." Willa squeezed his hand. "Is that why you work so much, to leave your mark?" The question struck closer to truth than Stevie expected. "Maybe. I've never been good at balance. Relationships before you—" He trailed off, then admitted, "They always fell apart because I couldn't divide myself between my work and another person." "And now?" Willa asked softly. Stevie turned to face her fully, framing her face with his hands, as if she were precious beyond measure. "Now I find myself designing buildings with you in mind, wondering what you would think of the light in a certain room, or if a space would make you feel peaceful." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It terrifies me, how quickly you've become essential." Willa's eyes glistened in the fading light. "I understand that fear. In my research, I work with women whose entire identities have been consumed by the desire for children. I've always been afraid of losing myself completely to another person's needs." She took a shaky breath. "But with you, it doesn't feel like losing. It feels like becoming more fully myself." They returned to the cottage as darkness settled over the beach. Inside, with only the moonlight and the sound of waves as witnesses, they moved toward each other with newfound intensity. Their lovemaking had always been passionate, but tonight carried the weight of their confessions. Stevie traced reverent patterns across Willa's skin, as if memorizing her by touch. "You're extraordinary," he whispered against her neck, feeling her pulse quicken beneath his lips. Her hands pulled him closer, her body arching to meet his, their connection transcending the physical. Later, wrapped in tangled sheets with the ocean breeze cooling their skin, Willa rested her head on Stevie's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I've never told anyone this," she began hesitantly, "but I've always worried that my work might make me a hypocrite." "How so?" Stevie asked, fingers gently stroking her shoulder. "I help women conceive children, but I've never been certain I want them myself." The admission hung in the air between them. "My mother has always been disappointed by that. In Ghanaian culture, there's such emphasis on family continuation." Instead of the judgment she feared, Stevie's arms tightened around her. "Life isn't a prescription, Willa. We get to decide what fulfillment means for us." The simplicity of his acceptance brought tears to her eyes. "What about you? Do you want children?" "I haven't allowed myself to think about it," he admitted. "Building a family requires presence, and I've never been sure I could offer that." His hand found hers in the darkness. "But with you, I find myself considering possibilities I never have before." The weekend passed in a blur of intimate conversations, long walks and passionate reconnections. They cooked together in the cottage's small kitchen, Willa teaching Stevie the proper way to prepare plantains, while he shared stories of growing up with Maori traditions in New Zealand. On Sunday afternoon, as they prepared to return to the city, Stevie found Willa standing at the windows, watching the ocean with a pensive expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That I don't want this weekend to end," she admitted. "That I'm afraid, once we're back in the real world, with deadlines and expectations, this might fade like a dream." Stevie turned her to face him. "This isn't a dream, Willa. It's the most real thing I've ever known." He kissed her with such tenderness that her doubts momentarily receded. "I'm not going anywhere." The return to their everyday lives proved Stevie's Words true. Rather than drifting apart under the pressure of their demanding careers, they found ways to weave their lives together. Stevie would bring dinner to Willa's lab on nights when her research kept her late. Willa would wake early to have breakfast with Stevie before his international conference calls. They discovered the pleasure of ordinary moments, grocery shopping on Sunday mornings, debating documentaries from opposite ends of the couch, falling asleep to the rhythm of each other's breathing. These simple intimacies somehow felt more profound than their grandest gestures. One evening, as December snow fell outside Stevie's penthouse, they lay intertwined before the fireplace, sharing a bottle of wine and comfortable silence. "I've been offered a visiting position at a research hospital in Chicago," Willa said suddenly, her expression unreadable. 3 months, starting in February. Stevie's heart constricted, but he kept his voice even. "That's a remarkable opportunity. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know," she admitted. 3 months is a long time." "It is," he agreed, then added, "but Chicago is only a 2-hour flight away." Willa sat up to look at him directly. "You'd be willing to try long distance?" "I'd be willing to try anything that keeps you in my life," Stevie said with quiet certainty. "This is important for your career, Willa. I would never ask you to diminish yourself for me." Tears gathered in her eyes. "How did I find you? In all the world, how did my car break down at exactly the right moment for you to drive by?" Stevie pulled her back into his arms, his lips finding hers with fierce tenderness. "I don't know," he whispered between kisses that grew increasingly urgent. "But I'm profoundly grateful it did." That night, as snow continued to blanket the city, in white silence, Stevie watched Willa sleep beside him. The reality of how completely she had transformed his life in just 3 months struck him with overwhelming clarity. Before her, his existence had been defined by buildings and blueprints, achievements and accolades. Now those things, while still important, felt hollow without her to share them. With absolute certainty, Stevie realized he never wanted to return to a life without Willa Winter in it. The thought should have terrified him, this swift and thorough reordering of his priorities. Instead, it settled in his chest with the weight of inevitable truth. Tomorrow, he would call his grandmother in New Zealand to ask about the family heirloom she had promised him when he found the one. He would begin designing a ring that honored both their heritages, a token of the future he suddenly couldn't imagine without her. For now, though, he simply drew Willa closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead as she murmured in her sleep. Their whirlwind romance had altered the course of his carefully planned life, and for the first time, Stevie welcomed the beautiful chaos of uncertainty. Chapter 3. Building a Future Together. 8 months into their relationship, Stevie found himself standing alone on the rooftop garden of his latest architectural achievement, a 20-story, sustainable office building that seamlessly integrated indoor and outdoor spaces. Tonight, however, his focus wasn't on the innovative design that had earned praise from critics. His attention was fixed on the small velvet box in his pocket and the woman who would soon join him. Before Willa's arrival, he performed a brief karakia, a Maori prayer his grandmother had taught him, asking his ancestors for their blessing. Around his neck hung the punamu pendant his mother had sent from New Zealand for this specific occasion, the sacred green stone that symbolized important life transitions. He had incorporated elements of Wanao, family and Wenua land into his proposal plans, honoring the Maori belief that significant life events should connect past, present, and future generations. The elevator doors opened, and Willa stepped, out stunning in a deep burgundy dress that complemented her rich complexion. For a moment, Stevie forgot to breathe. "This is incredible," she said, taking in the lush garden with its panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. "You've outdone yourself." "It's not finished yet," Stevie replied, taking her hand and leading her toward a secluded corner where a table was set for two, surrounded by fragrant night-blooming jasmine. The final element arrives tonight. Candlelight flickered across the table as they shared a meal prepared by a private chef. Willa recounted her day at the research lab, her eyes bright with excitement as she described a breakthrough in her fertility study. Stevie listened intently, his love for her deepening with each passing moment. As the evening progressed, Stevie grew uncharacteristically quiet. Willa noticed, her head tilted in concern. "Is everything all right? You seem distracted." He reached across the table for her hand. "I've been thinking about destiny lately." "That's unlike you," she teased gently. "You're usually so practical." "I was," he agreed, "until I met you." He stood, drawing her up with him, and guided her to the edge of the garden where the city lights stretched endlessly below them. "Before you came into my life, I built spaces for other people to find meaning in. Now I understand what that meaning is." Reaching into his pocket, Stevie withdrew the box and lowered himself to one knee. Willa's hands flew to her mouth, eyes widening. "Willa Winter," he said, voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "You changed everything for me. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, unlike any other, a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones arranged in patterns that incorporated both Adinkra symbols from Ghana and traditional Maori designs from his heritage. Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. When she finally found her voice, it was a whisper. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." Stevie slipped the ring onto her finger before rising to gather her in his arms, their kiss a silent promise beneath the stars. The wedding planning became a beautiful merging of their cultures and families. Willa's parents flew in from Accra, bringing traditional kente cloth and wisdom. Stevie's mother and siblings arrived from Auckland with family heirlooms and Maori blessings. What could have been a clash of traditions instead became a celebration of their shared values. "My daughter has always been independent," Willa's father confided to Stevie one evening as they shared drinks on the balcony. "When she told us she had found someone special, I was skeptical. Now I see why she chose you. You don't dim her light. You help it shine brighter." The sentiment moved Stevie deeply. "I've never met anyone like her," he admitted. "She makes me want to be worthy of her brilliance." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect May morning. The ceremony took place in the botanical gardens, where paths lined with white orchids led to a circular clearing. Ghanaian drums accompanied Willa as she walked towards Stevie, resplendent in a gown that combined Western elegance with traditional African details. Stevie, waiting beneath an arch of indigenous flowers from both their homelands, felt his world narrow to this single perfect moment as Willa approached. Their vows, written together over late-night cups of tea, spoke not of blind promises but of conscious choice, to grow together, to honor each other's dreams, to build a shared life while respecting their individual journeys. "I choose you today, and every day that follows," Willa's voice carried clear and true across the gathering, "not because fate brought us together, but because we choose to stay together." Stevie's response resonated with equal conviction. "I will build my life with you and around you, creating spaces where both our spirits can flourish." The celebration afterward blended traditions, Ghanaian dancing giving way to a Maori haka performed by Stevie's cousins, followed by a jazz quartet and cuisine that represented their diverse heritages. As evening fell, lanterns illuminated the garden, casting a golden glow over the gathering. "Mrs. Mariu," Stevie whispered in Willa's ear as they swayed together for their first dance. "How does it feel?" Willa smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the surrounding lights. "Like coming home to a place I've never been before." Later that night, in the privacy of their suite, their lovemaking held a new dimension. Each touch, each whispered endearment carried the weight of the vows they had exchanged. Stevie traced the curve of Willa's shoulder with reverent fingers, memorizing her anew as his wife. "I never understood when people talked about souls recognizing each other," he confessed against her skin. "But from that first night in the rain, something in me knew you." Willa's response was to draw him closer, their bodies speaking promises that transcended words. The weeks following their wedding were spent honeymooning on a private island in the South Pacific, where crystal waters, pristine beaches. Days passed in blissful exploration of the island and of each other. They snorkeled among vibrant coral reefs, hiked to hidden waterfalls, and spent hours simply being together without the demands of work or schedules. On their final evening, they sat on the beach watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "I've been thinking," Stevie said, his arm around Willa's shoulders, "about where we'll live when we return." Willa turned to look at him. "I assumed we'd stay at your place. It's bigger than mine. What if we created something new? A home that belongs to both of us from its foundation." His eyes lit with the familiar excitement she recognized from when he spoke of his architectural visions. "I've been sketching ideas, a house that combines elements meaningful to both our cultures, with space for your home laboratory and my design studio." Willa's heart swelled at the thought he had put into this. "You've been designing our home?" "Just preliminary ideas," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "I wanted to include you in the process." She kissed him softly. "Show me." Under the fading light, Stevie shared sketches of a modern home with traditional influences, a central courtyard reminiscent of Ghanaian family compounds, natural materials honoring Maori connection to the earth, and abundant light throughout. Most touching to Willa was the detail he had included for their future. Space that could easily be converted to a nursery should they decide to have children. "It's perfect," she whispered, tracing the lines of their potential future home. "When can we start building it?" Upon their return to New York, they threw themselves into creating their shared home while continuing their respective careers. Their first important decision was hiring Marcus Thompson, a dignified former butler with a military background, to manage their household. Initially hired as staff, Marcus quickly became more like family, a steadying presence who remembered birthdays, anticipated needs, and offered quiet wisdom when asked. Both Stevie and Willa came to rely on him as a confidant and constant in their often hectic lives. Meanwhile, Stevie's architecture firm expanded internationally, while Willa's research gained recognition in medical journals. With Marcus handling the day-to-day running of their home, they negotiated the balance of ambition and togetherness with intentional care, never taking for granted the foundation they were building. 6 months after their wedding, they stood together on the plot of land that would become their home, watching as construction began. The first beams rose against the autumn sky, physical manifestations of their shared dreams. "This is just the beginning," Stevie said, his arm around Willa's waist as they watched workers pour the foundation. "Of our home, of our life together." Willa leaned into his embrace, her heart full with certainty. "I can't wait to see what we build next." Chapter 4. The Shadow of Uncertainty. 2 years into their marriage, Willa and Stevie settled into their custom-designed home on the outskirts of the city. The house, a stunning fusion of contemporary architecture and cultural heritage, had been featured in several design magazines. Its warm interior spaces flowed seamlessly into lush gardens that offered privacy while maintaining views of the distant Manhattan skyline. Willa's career had flourished alongside their personal life. Her groundbreaking research on fertility treatments for women in underserved communities had earned her recognition in leading medical journals. As the youngest department head at her research hospital, she regularly consulted on complex cases and delivered keynote addresses at international conferences. Her colleagues respected her methodical approach to medicine, her ability to maintain clinical objectivity even in emotionally charged cases, and her gift for translating complex medical information into compassionate guidance for patients. The irony that she counseled women through fertility challenges while facing her own remained a private struggle, one she approached with the same detailed research and careful analysis she applied to her professional work. She maintained comprehensive journals documenting every treatment, medication, and physiological response, constantly seeking patterns or overlooked variables that might explain their difficulty conceiving. On a bright Sunday morning, sunlight streamed through the bedroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across the bed where Willa lay in Stevie's arms. These lazy weekend mornings had become sacred to them both, a respite from their demanding careers. "I was thinking," Willa murmured against Stevie's chest. "Maybe it's time." "Time for what?" Stevie asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. Willa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him directly. "Time to try for a baby." The words hung between them, charged with possibility. They had discussed children in abstract terms during their marriage, but never with concrete intention. Stevie studied his wife's face, noting the mixture of hope and vulnerability in her expression. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "I thought you were uncertain about motherhood." "I was," she admitted. "But watching you design this house with space for a family, seeing how you are with our friends' children, it's changed something in me." She took a deep breath. "And my research has given me insight into how quickly fertility can change. If we want to try, perhaps we shouldn't wait." Stevie pulled her closer, kissing her with tender passion. "Nothing would make me happier than creating a family with you," he whispered against her lips. What began as a joyful decision soon transformed their intimate life. The spontaneous passion that had always characterized their relationship took on new purpose. Willa tracked her cycles with scientific precision, and their lovemaking, while still tender, sometimes carried the weight of expectation. "Tonight should be optimal," Willa said one evening, checking the fertility app on her phone as Stevie returned from the office. He set down his portfolio and crossed the room to take her in his arms. "Then let's forget about optimal," he suggested, gently taking the phone from her hand and setting it aside. "Let's just be us." That night they reconnected with the uninhibited passion of their early relationship. Stevie worshipped every inch of Willa's body with unhurried devotion, whispering words of love against her skin. For those hours, the goal of conception faded into the background, overshadowed by their profound connection. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets dampened with perspiration, Willa traced the Maori-inspired tattoo that curved across Stevie's shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured. "I needed to remember what this is really about." "Us," Stevie replied simply, kissing her forehead. "It's always about us." But as months passed without success, a subtle tension began to infiltrate their home. Willa's professional knowledge became both blessing and curse. She understood the statistics all too well. After 6 months of trying, she scheduled appointments with specialists, subjecting herself to tests she had often recommended to her patients. Stevie accompanied her to each appointment, holding her hand through uncomfortable procedures and blood draws. The results, when they finally came, offered no clear answers. "Everything appears normal," Dr. Patel explained, reviewing their files in her sunny office. "This is what we call unexplained infertility. It's actually quite common." "What's the next step?" Stevie asked, his hand firm around Willa's. "We could consider fertility treatments," the doctor suggested. Given your ages and overall excellent health, I'd recommend starting with ovulation induction and intrauterine insemination. In the car afterward, Willa stared silently out the window, her usual vibrancy dimmed. Stevie reached across to take her hand. "Talk to me, love. I help women conceive every day," she said, her voice barely audible. "I counsel them through this exact situation. Yet here I am, unable to follow my own advice about staying positive." "We've only been trying for 8 months," Stevie reminded her gently. "And the doctor said everything looks normal." "Unexplained. Infertility," Willa repeated bitterly. "Do you know what that means in medical terms? It means they don't know what's wrong, but something clearly is." That evening, Stevie found Willa in their home office, surrounded by medical journals and research. Papers, her laptop open to statistical analyses of fertility treatment success rates. "You need to rest," he said, massaging her tense shoulders. "I need to understand," she countered, gesturing to the papers. "There has to be something we're missing." Stevie knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Willa, look at me." When she finally met his gaze, he continued, "Whether we have a child or not, whether it happens naturally or through treatment or adoption or not at all, it doesn't change what we have. You are enough for me. We are enough." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks. "But what if I'm not enough for myself? What if I can't give you children?" "Then we'll navigate that together," he promised, drawing her into his arms. Like everything else. They began fertility treatments the following month. The procedures turned their home into a medical outpost. Scheduled injections, precise timing, and the clinical nature of conception attempts straining the spontaneity they had once cherished. Willa's body reacted to the hormones with mood swings and physical discomfort, yet she persevered with determined focus. Stevie watched with growing concern as his vibrant wife transformed into someone laser-focused on a single goal. He tried to maintain normalcy, planning date nights and weekend getaways, but Willa's attention remained fixed on treatment schedules and possible pregnancy symptoms. After their third failed insemination attempt, Stevie returned home one evening to find Willa sitting in their darkened living room, a glass of untouched wine beside her. "I got my period today," she said without preamble. "We can start another cycle next week." Stevie sat beside her, taking the wine glass and setting it aside. "Maybe we should take a break," he suggested carefully. "Just for a month or two, to remember who we are beyond this process." Willa turned to him, her expression sharp with hurt. "You want to give up?" "No," he said firmly. "I want us back. These past months we've barely connected except through treatment schedules and procedures." "That's not fair," Willa protested, rising to her feet. "I'm doing everything possible to create our family." "At what cost?" Stevie asked, standing to face her. "You're exhausted. You're unhappy. This isn't how it should be." "How should it be?" "Stevie, easy, because that's not reality for millions of couples." Her voice rose with emotion. "If you're not committed to this, I'm committed to you," he interrupted, taking her shoulders gently. "To us, to your well-being. And this is taking a toll I can't ignore anymore." Willa pulled away, tears streaming down her face. "I need some air," she whispered, grabbing her coat and keys. When she returned hours later, Stevie was waiting in the kitchen with chamomile tea and quiet patience. They talked until dawn, honest, painful conversations about expectations, disappointment, and the future they both still wanted, whether with children or without. "I'm sorry," Willa finally said, as morning light crept through the windows. "I've been so focused on what we don't have that I've forgotten to cherish what we do." Stevie wrapped her in his arms. "We'll find our way through this, whatever path that takes. I promise." They agreed to continue treatments, but with boundaries to protect their relationship. Date nights became technology-free zones. They reinstated weekend hikes that had once been their ritual. Slowly, They reclaimed parts of themselves that had been overshadowed by the pursuit of parenthood, yet privately, each harbored silent fears. Behind his supportive exterior, Stevie wondered if his family's unspoken history of fertility issues might be the undiagnosed problem. In quiet moments, alone, he researched his genealogy, noting the small family sizes and adopted children across generations. Meanwhile, Willa battled her own demons. As a fertility specialist, she had counseled countless women through this journey, assuring them that their worth wasn't tied to their ability to conceive. Now, she struggled to extend the same compassion to herself, her professional identity and personal experience colliding in painful contradiction. As they approached their third anniversary, the shadow of uncertainty lingered, testing the foundation they had built together. Yet beneath the strain, their love remained. Changed, perhaps, but no less profound for having weathered these unexpected storms. Chapter 5. The growing distance as their third anniversary quietly passed and merged into their fifth year of marriage. Stevie and Willa's relationship underwent a subtle but persistent transformation. The once inseparable couple found themselves increasingly living parallel lives under the same exquisitely designed roof. Stevie's architecture firm, Mariu Design Group, had garnered international acclaim after completing a sustainable community complex in Singapore. With this success came a flood of overseas opportunities. Initially, he declined most foreign projects, prioritizing his presence at home while Willa underwent fertility treatments. One evening, Stevie returned home to find Willa asleep on the couch, surrounded by medical journals, an empty wine glass. On the coffee table, he gently removed her reading glasses and covered her with a throw blanket, studying her face in repose. The perpetual furrow between her brows remained even in sleep, a testament to the stress she carried constantly. 3 years of fertility treatments had yielded nothing but disappointment and depleted savings. Their last appointment with Dr. Patel had resulted in the same vague prognosis: unexplained infertility. Though Willa continued pursuing increasingly aggressive treatments, something in her vibrant spirit had dimmed. The next morning, over a quiet breakfast, Stevie made a decision. "I've been offered a major project in Paris," he said, sliding the proposal across the table. "Sustainable redesign of a historic district. It would mean 3 months on site." Willa looked up from her untouched toast, surprise momentarily displacing the fatigue in her eyes. "You've been turning down international work for years. Perhaps it's time I stopped," he replied carefully. The advance alone would cover another round of IVF. The unspoken reality hung between them. Their savings had dwindled significantly, the combined costs of fertility treatments and their custom home straining even their substantial dual incomes. "You want to go?" Willa observed. No accusation. In her tone, just weary understanding. Stevie hesitated, then opted for honesty. "I think some distance might be good for us both right now, because I've become so obsessed." The edge in her voice betrayed her hurt. "Because we're both drowning," Stevie countered gently. "And I don't know how to help you anymore." Willa's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "Perhaps you're right," she said finally. "Take the project. We could use the money and maybe—" She didn't finish the thought, but Stevie understood. Maybe space would heal what proximity could not. The weeks before Stevie's departure passed in a flurry of preparation. On the surface, they functioned with polite efficiency. Willa helped him pack. Stevie arranged for home maintenance during his absence. They discussed logistics and schedules, but carefully avoided deeper conversations about the state of their marriage or Willa's plans to continue treatments while he was away. The night before his flight, they made love with desperate intensity, as if trying to remember what had once come so naturally between them. For a few precious hours, they recaptured their connection, whispering words of love and reassurance. But morning brought a return of the careful distance that had become their norm. At the airport, Stevie held Willa tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you," he said firmly. "That hasn't changed." "I know," she replied, her voice muffled against his chest. "I love you too." As she watched him disappear through security, Willa felt a strange mixture of loss and relief. The contradiction, mirroring the complexity of what their marriage had become. Paris greeted Stevie with spring rain and professional challenges that demanded his complete focus. The project was more complex than anticipated, requiring diplomatic navigation of local historical preservation committees alongside innovative sustainable design. He threw himself into the work, grateful for the distraction from his personal concerns. His daily video calls with Willa grew shorter and less frequent as time passed. She spoke enthusiastically about her research advancements, but avoided discussing fertility treatments. Stevie didn't press for details, sensing her need for control over that narrative. 6 weeks into his Paris assignment, Stevie attended a cocktail reception for project stakeholders. As he discussed architectural details with local officials, his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, their household manager back in New York. "You should call Mrs. Mariou when you have a moment. She seemed upset earlier." Concerned, Stevie excused himself and stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the Seine. Willa answered on the 4th ring, her voice carefully composed. "What's wrong?" Stevie asked immediately. "It's nothing," she replied. "Marcus shouldn't have texted you. Willa, please." A long silence followed before she sighed. "I had an appointment today. Dr. Patel thinks we should consider using an egg donor. Apparently, my ovarian reserve is declining faster than expected." The news hit Stevie like a physical blow. "I should have been there with you." "It wouldn't have changed the diagnosis," Willa said, her tone detached and clinical. "Besides, you're doing important work there." "Not more important than you," Stevie insisted. "It's fine, Stevie, really. I'm fine." But the hollowness in her voice told a different story. After they disconnected, Stevie remained on the balcony, watching boats glide along the dark river below, feeling the distance between them expand beyond mere geography. The following weekend, Stevie attended a colleague's family gathering in a Parisian suburb. As children raced through the garden, their laughter echoing between manicured hedges, he found himself watching one little girl in particular. With her glossy black curls and confident demeanor, she reminded him powerfully of how he imagined a daughter with Willa might look. The child's mother, noticing his gaze, approached with a friendly smile. "She's a handful, but worth every grey hair," she said in accented English. "She's beautiful," Stevie replied sincerely. "Do you have children?" "Mr. Mariou?" The innocent question landed like a blow. "No," he said simply. "Ah, well, plenty of time, yes?" She patted his arm kindly before moving away to wrangle her energetic daughter. But was there plenty of time? Stevie wondered as he walked back to his apartment that evening. The question haunted him throughout the night. The next morning he called Willa earlier than usual, forgetting the time difference. She answered groggily, clearly having been asleep. "I'm sorry," he began. "I just needed to hear your voice." "Is everything okay?" she asked, immediately concerned. "I miss you," he admitted. "More than I expected to." Her soft exhale carried through the connection. "I miss you too." "I've been thinking about what Dr. Patel suggested," Stevie continued before his courage failed. "About the egg donor." "I don't want to talk about that right now," Willa said, her voice instantly shuddering. "We need to talk about it sometime. When you're home. Not like this, not with you thousands of miles away." The conversation ended shortly after, with unresolved tension humming between them. As his project in Paris progressed, Stevie found himself working increasingly long hours, sometimes sleeping on the office couch rather than returning to his empty apartment. His colleagues noticed his dedication, but also his isolation, occasionally inviting him to join their family, dinners or weekend outings. Stevie usually declined, using work as his excuse. Back in New York, Willa created her own routines to fill the emptiness of their home. She accepted additional research responsibilities, often staying at her laboratory until midnight. On weekends, she volunteered at a community clinic that served women with limited access to reproductive health care. One Saturday afternoon, she helped coordinate a baby shower for a young single mother who had overcome significant obstacles to carry her pregnancy to term. As Willa arranged gift baskets and hung decorations, a colleague commented on her natural affinity with their patients. "You're so good with them," the woman observed. "You'll be an amazing mother someday." The casual remark pierced Willa's carefully maintained composure. She excused herself, locking the bathroom door, before allowing tears to fall. When she emerged 30 minutes later, her professional smile was firmly back in place. But something inside her had shifted, a crystallization of grief that had been building for years. That evening she found herself drawn to the nursery Stevie had designed in their home, a room that remained unfurnished except for a rocking chair by the window. Sitting in that chair, watching the sunset paint the empty walls with golden light, Willa made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. 2 weeks before Stevie's scheduled return, they spoke via video call. Willa appeared, composed, almost serene, which struck Stevie as oddly incongruent with their recent strained interactions. "How are you really doing?" he asked, studying her face on the screen. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she replied. "About us. About the future." "What kind of thinking?" A note of apprehension colored his voice. "I'll tell you when you're home," she said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Some conversations shouldn't happen across an ocean. As Stevie prepared to board his flight home, a complex mixture of emotions churned within him. Excitement to see Willa, apprehension about the state of their marriage, and beneath it all, a persistent hope that somehow they would find their way back to each other. What he couldn't know was that Willa had already set in motion a plan born of desperation and misguided love. A decision she believed would free him to find happiness she thought she couldn't provide. Chapter 6. The Desperate Decision. The day after her final video call with Stevie, Willa sat in her home office surrounded by legal documents, medical records, and a half-written letter. The morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air, evidence of a home not lived in fully, despite its architectural perfection. For weeks, she had been planning this, ever since that moment, in the empty nursery, when something inside her had finally broken. The methodical researcher who counseled patients through their darkest moments had turned those analytical skills inward, examining her situation with clinical detachment. Her mind, trained to assess medical probabilities and outcomes, had created elaborate justifications that seemed rational in her isolation. Her professional knowledge had become a double-edged sword. The fertility specialist in her understood the statistics and diminishing returns of further treatment. The scientist who tracked data patterns recognized the toll that years of failed cycles had taken on their marriage. The physician who had observed couples separating after similar struggles projected that outcome onto her own relationship. Yet beneath this veneer of medical rationality, an emotional collapse was occurring that the composed Dr. Winter would never have permitted in her patients. The wife in her could no longer bear watching Stevie's careful optimism crumble with each failure. The woman in her was exhausted from years of her body becoming a medical project rather than a source of joy. The researcher who helped others maintain perspective had lost her own, allowing depression to distort her perception of Stevie's unwavering love. Mrs. Mariu? Marcus's voice called from the doorway, interrupting her thoughts. Their long-time household manager stood with concern etched on his features. In the 5 years of their marriage, Marcus had become more than an employee. He was family, the steady presence who kept their home running when their careers demanded everything from them. Yes, Marcus? Willa quickly covered the letter with a folder. I've prepared lunch. You haven't eaten today. Willa glanced at the clock, surprised to find it was already past 2. Thank you. I'll be right there. When Marcus hesitated rather than leaving, Willa looked up questioningly. Forgive me for overstepping, he began cautiously, but I'm concerned. You've been different since Mr. Mariu left for Paris. A sad smile crossed Willa's face. Different how? Quieter, more determined, like someone making difficult decisions. The accuracy of his observation startled her. You've always been perceptive, Marcus. Mr. Mariu would want to know if something's troubling you. At the mention of Stevie, Willa's resolve momentarily wavered. The life they had built together, the love they had nurtured, deserved more than what she was planning. Yet, in her heart, distorted by years of disappointment and self-blame, she truly believed she was doing what was best for him. Marcus, she said finally, I need to ask something of you that goes beyond your usual responsibilities, something that requires absolute discretion. The older man's expression grew solemn. Of course, Mrs. Mariu. I'll explain everything tomorrow. For now, I just need to finish some work alone. After Marcus reluctantly withdrew, Willa returned to her letter. The words flowed now, a mixture of truth and carefully constructed fiction that would give Stevie the freedom she believed he deserved. The following morning, Willa called Marcus to her study. Dressed immaculately in one of her tailored research suits, she presented the calm demeanor she typically reserved for delivering difficult medical news to patients. I'm leaving, she stated simply. And Stevie can never know where I've gone. Marcus's eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Mariu, if this is about the fertility treatments, it's about giving Stevie a chance at the family he deserves, Willa interrupted, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. He would never leave me, Marcus. His loyalty wouldn't allow it, even if staying means sacrificing his chance at fatherhood. So you're making that decision for him? Marcus couldn't hide his disapproval. I'm setting him free. Willa handed him a sealed envelope. 3 days from now you'll call Stevie in Paris and tell him I've died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. Marcus took an involuntary step backward. You want me to tell Mr. Mariu that you're dead? I can't possibly. You must, Willa insisted, her composure finally cracking. Please, Marcus, I've arranged everything. Medical records have been altered. A death certificate will be filed. There will be no body. I've arranged for cremation papers. This is madness, Marcus whispered. You can't possibly believe this. Is the right thing to do. I've watched him with our friends' children, Willa continued, tears finally breaking through her professional facade. The natural way he connects with them, the longing in his eyes afterward. 5 years of trying has only brought us pain. He deserves a chance with someone who can give him what I cannot. Mrs. Mariu, Willa, please reconsider. Mr. Mariu loves you, not the possibility of children. This will destroy him. He'll grieve, she acknowledged, wiping away tears with steady hands. But eventually, he'll move forward. He'll find someone new, someone whole. You are whole, Marcus insisted, and this plan is not. Willa's expression hardened. I've made my decision, Marcus. When you call him, you'll also mention that I left a letter with specific requests. She handed him another envelope. This contains my final wishes, including the request that Stevie never visit my grave. Because there won't be one, Marcus said flatly. Because I couldn't bear knowing he was grieving there, Willa corrected. Will you help me, Marcus, please? The silence stretched between them, heavy with the magnitude of what she was asking. Finally, Marcus spoke. I've served your family faithfully, but this goes against everything I believe is right. I know, Willa said softly, and I'm sorry to ask it of you, but there's no one else I trust. Another long pause followed before Marcus reluctantly nodded. I will do as you ask, not because I agree, but because I fear what you might do if I refuse. At least this way, I can try to minimize the damage. Relief washed over Willa's features. Thank you. Don't thank me for this, he replied gravely. Ever. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of careful preparations. Willa had rented a small apartment across town under a different name months earlier, gradually transferring personal items there without Stevie's knowledge. She had opened new bank accounts with a portion of her personal savings, ensuring the transactions couldn't be traced. As a medical professional with extensive connections, she had managed to arrange for falsified records that would withstand casual scrutiny. On her last night in the home she had shared with Stevie, Willa wandered through each room, memorizing details and collecting memories. In their bedroom, she lay on his side of the bed, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that lingered on the pillows. In his office, she ran her fingers over the drawings of their house, the home he had, designed with such hope for their future together. Finally, she returned to the nursery, empty except for that single rocking chair. Sitting there as night fell, she allowed herself to fully grieve, for the children they would never have together, for the life she was abandoning, for the pain she would cause the man she loved more than anything. I'm sorry, she whispered into the darkness. Please forgive me someday. Dawn found her composed once more, her luggage waiting by the door. Marcus stood silently as she made a final survey of the home. Everything is arranged as we discussed, he confirmed reluctantly. The death certificate will be filed tomorrow. I'll call Mr. Mariu afterward. Willa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she reached for the door, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her arm. It's not too late to reconsider, he said quietly. He returns in less than 2 weeks. You could talk to him, really talk to him. For a moment, doubt flickered across Willa's face. Then she straightened her shoulders. Take care of him for me, Marcus. With those words, she walked out of the life she had built with Stevie Mariu. Her new apartment was small but serviceable, located in a neighborhood where she was unlikely to encounter anyone from their social circle. The stark white walls and generic furnishings bore no resemblance to the warm, culturally rich home she had left behind. It felt appropriate somehow, a blank slate for her new non-existence. That first night alone, the magnitude of what she had done hit Willa with physical force. Curled on an unfamiliar bed, she wept until no more tears would come, her body aching with the emptiness of her choice. The rational part of her brain screamed that she had made a terrible mistake, that no fertility struggle justified this extreme deception. Yet the wounded part, the part that had internalized every failed treatment as personal failure, insisted that Stevie would be better without her. The following day, Marcus called as promised. It's done, he said, his voice hollow. Mr. Mariu received the news an hour ago. How did he... Willa couldn't finish the question. He collapsed, Marcus said bluntly. His colleagues had to catch him. He's in shock, barely able to speak. They're concerned about his physical health. Each word was a dagger to Willa's heart. He's strong, she whispered, trying to convince herself. He'll recover. From losing the love of his life? I wouldn't be so certain. Marcus's voice held no comfort. I've done what you asked, Mrs. Mariu. I won't call again. I can't be part of this deception any further. The line went dead, leaving Willa alone with the consequences of her decision. Days passed in a fog as Willa established her new identity. She had arranged a research position at a small hospital under her maiden name, leveraging connections who owed her professional favors. The work was menial compared to her previous position, but it kept her occupied during the day, leaving only the nights to battle her doubts and loneliness. 2 weeks after her death, she received a package from Marcus, sent to her new address. Against his earlier refusal to maintain contact, inside was a newspaper clipping about Stevie's return to New York, accompanied by a brief note in Marcus's handwriting. He visits the cemetery every Sunday with white orchids. Your plan is working. I hope that brings you the peace you sought. The words, devoid of Marcus's usual warmth, cut deeper than any accusation. Willa had expected Stevie to grieve, yes, but she had also expected him to eventually move forward, to date again, to find someone who could give him children. The image of him bringing flowers to an empty grave shattered her already fragile justifications. That night, she dreamed of Stevie calling her name through darkness, his voice breaking with grief. She woke, gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, her pillow damp with tears. For the first time since implementing her plan, Willa allowed herself to consider the possibility that she had made a catastrophic error. But what could she do now? Reappear and admit her deception? The pain of her absence would pale compared to the betrayal of such manipulation. No, she had made her choice. The kindest thing now was to remain dead, allowing Stevie's grief to follow its natural course toward healing and new beginnings. Or so she told herself in the quiet hours before dawn, when doubt pressed heaviest against her chest. As weeks became months, Willa established a routine in her new half-life. Work, home, occasional necessary outings with her head down, and appearance altered just enough to avoid recognition. She followed news of Stevie from afar through industry publications, learning that he had returned to work but declined all international projects. His firm continued to thrive, but friends quoted in articles expressed concern about his withdrawal from social life. 7 months into her self-imposed exile, Willa received another unexpected package from Marcus. This one contained only a handwritten note. He still visits every Sunday, still wears his wedding ring, still speaks to you as, if you can hear him, if you truly love him, witness this for yourself. Below the note was an address, the cemetery where her empty grave stood, and a time. For days, Willa debated what to do with this information. The thought of seeing Stevie again, even from a distance, both terrified and tempted her. Eventually, driven by a need stronger than fear, she made her decision. That Sunday, dressed in nondescript clothes with a scarf covering much of her face, Willa entered the cemetery Marcus had identified. At a safe distance, she watched as Stevie approached a simple headstone, white orchids cradled in his arms like a precious child. Chapter 7. Grief and Devotion. Paris had never felt so cold to Stevie as it did the moment Marcus's voice came through. His phone, heavy with what he would later recognize as reluctance rather than grief. Mr. Mariou, I'm afraid I have terrible news. Stevie had been standing on a construction site, architectural plans spread across a temporary table, the spring sun warming his back as he discussed structural modifications with the project manager. At first, his mind refused to process Marcus's words, phrases like sudden heart condition and passed in her sleep, bouncing off his consciousness like hail on a window. Mr. Mariou, are you there, sir? This isn't possible, Stevie finally managed, his voice a stranger's. I spoke to her last night. The doctors believe it was an undiagnosed condition, Marcus continued, his usually steady voice faltering. There was nothing anyone could have done. The world tilted beneath Stevie's feet. His colleagues later told him he had simply crumpled, the plans scattering in the wind as they rushed to catch him before he hit the ground. The next hours existed only in fragments in his memory, being guided to a chair, someone pressing water into his hands, the French project manager making urgent phone calls in rapid-fire language Stevie could no longer comprehend. "She left a letter for you," Marcus added, the words seeming to come from very far away, "with her final wishes." Later that day, in the privacy of his Paris apartment, Stevie read Willa's letter with shaking hands. Her familiar handwriting, precise yet flowing, like the woman herself, blurred through his tears as he absorbed her final message. "My beloved Stevie, if you're reading this, I've left this world too soon, and for that, I am deeply sorry. There are so many things we still had to experience together, so many designs you had yet to create, so many patients I had yet to help. Life is cruelly unpredictable that way. I have only a few requests in death, but I ask that you honor them. Absolutely. First, I wish to be cremated immediately. My research has made me too aware of what happens to the body after death, and I cannot bear the thought of you seeing me that way. Second, and most importantly, promise me you will never visit my grave. Instead, live your life fully, find joy again, create the family we couldn't have together. Know that my greatest regret is not being able to give you children, but my greatest hope is that you will find someone who can. You were the great love of my life, Stevie Mariu. Your passion, your kindness, your unwavering support through all our struggles. These were gifts I cherished every day. Please don't let grief diminish your beautiful spirit. The world needs your vision too much. Ald. My love, always. Willa Stevie read the letter 7 times before setting it aside. Something in her words felt wrong, too neat, too resigned, but grief clouded his analytical mind. All he could focus on was the impossible truth. Willa was gone. The brilliant mind that had challenged and enlightened him, the warm body that had fit so perfectly against his, the laugh that had brightened even their darkest days, all vanished without warning. For 3 days, Stevie wandered the streets of Paris in a daze, unable to return to his apartment or the construction site. He moved through the city like a ghost, occasionally finding himself standing before churches or by the river with no memory of how he had arrived there. His colleagues grew increasingly concerned, eventually contacting his mother in New Zealand, who immediately booked a flight to Paris. By the time she arrived, Stevie had managed to make arrangements to return to New York. The practical details required to bring Willa's body home, details that Marcus assured him had been handled according to her wishes, provided momentary anchors in a sea of disorientation. The flight home passed in a blur, his mother's steady presence beside him, the only tether to reality. When they landed, Marcus met them at the airport, his usually impassive face lined with concern. "Everything has been arranged as Mrs. Mariu requested," he informed them quietly. "The cremation has been completed." Stevie nodded mechanically, unable to process that Willa had been reduced to ashes while he was in transit. That evening, entering their home without her for the first time, the full weight of his loss finally crushed him. He stood in the entryway, surrounded by evidence of their shared life, her coat still hanging by the door, her favorite books arranged precisely on the living room shelves, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, and broke completely. His mother and Marcus found him on the floor, keening with grief, clutching one of Willa's scarves to his face. They guided him to bed, where exhaustion finally claimed him, offering temporary respite from consciousness. The following weeks passed in a fog of obligatory rituals. A memorial service was held, though without a body or ashes, which Marcus explained had been scattered at sea as per Willa's wishes. Colleagues and friends offered condolences that Stevie acknowledged with polite emptiness. His mother managed practical matters, ensuring he ate and slept, while Marcus maintained the household with quiet efficiency. 1 month after Willa's death, Stevie's mother returned to New Zealand, extracting a promise that he would call daily and seek grief counseling. He agreed to both, though he attended only 2 therapy sessions before stopping. The therapist had encouraged him to move forward, a concept that felt like betrayal. Instead, Stevie returned to work, throwing himself into projects with a focus that bordered on obsession. His employees watched with concern as he arrived before dawn and left long after midnight, producing brilliant designs while growing increasingly gaunt and remote. "She would want you to take care of yourself," Marcus ventured one evening, finding Stevie still at his home drafting table at 3 in the morning. "She wanted me never to visit her grave," Stevie replied without looking up. "Some wishes aren't meant to be kept." Despite Willa's explicit request, or perhaps because of it, Stevie had arranged for a small headstone in a quiet cemetery near their home. There was no body beneath it, but he needed a physical place to direct his grief, a focal point for the conversations he continued to have with her in his mind. His first visit came 2 months after her death, a Sunday morning, bright with early summer sunshine that felt obscenely cheerful against his mourning. He brought white orchids, her favorite, and sat awkwardly on the manicured grass, unsure how to begin. In the months that followed, he would sometimes bring different flowers that marked their history together, plumerias that reminded him of their honeymoon, lilies from her bridal bouquet, occasionally a single red rose from the bush he'd planted on their first anniversary. But he always returned to orchids, the living embodiment of her elegant strength. "I know you asked me not to come," he finally said aloud, feeling both foolish and desperate. "But loving you was the only thing I ever did right. I can't let that go." The one-sided conversation gradually became easier as he spoke about his week, his projects, the persistent emptiness of their home. When he finally left hours later, he felt a curious lightness, not happiness, but a momentary lifting of the crushing pressure that had become his constant companion. The following Sunday, he returned with fresh orchids and more stories. And the next Sunday, and the next. The cemetery groundskeeper began to nod in recognition when Stevie arrived, occasionally offering a sympathetic smile that Stevie acknowledged with a tight nod. Life settled into a new rhythm: work, sleep when exhaustion demanded it, and Sundays. With Willa, he declined social invitations, avoided friends' homes where children might be present, and rebuffed his mother's increasingly concerned inquiries about his isolation. "It's been 6 months," she said during one video call, her face creased with worry. "Willa wouldn't want you living like this." "Willa isn't here to want anything," Stevie replied flatly, immediately regretting the pain that flashed across his mother's features. "I'm sorry," he added. "I'm managing the best I can." The truth was that Stevie existed rather than lived. He continued producing exceptional architectural designs, his professional reputation growing even as his personal life diminished to almost nothing. His firm expanded, hiring additional staff to handle the influx of projects, allowing Stevie to retreat further into solitary creation. 7 months after Willa's death, on a crisp fall day that painfully echoed the season when they had first fallen in love, Stevie arrived at the cemetery with his customary offering of orchids. As he settled beside the headstone, he noticed someone watching from a distance, a woman in nondescript clothing, a scarf partially obscuring her face. Something about her stillness, the intent way she observed him, prickled his awareness. Turning back to the headstone, Stevie began his weekly ritual of one-sided conversation. "The Singapore project is finally complete," he told Willa's grave. "They're calling it revolutionary, but I keep thinking of all the ways it could be better. You always pushed me to consider how spaces affect people emotionally. I tried to honor that." He paused, arranging the orchids carefully. "My mother wants me to visit for Christmas. I haven't said yes yet. The thought of celebrating anything feels impossible." A crisp breeze rustled the nearby trees, sending golden leaves spiraling to the ground. Stevie watched them fall, remembering how Willa had loved autumn, the colors, the transformation, the promise of renewal after necessary endings. "Everyone says I should be moving forward by now," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your letter asked for that too, but they don't understand that without you, there is no forward. There's just existing in a world that doesn't make sense anymore." He rubbed his wedding ring, still firmly in place despite gentle suggestions from friends that removing it might be a healthy step. "James and Sophia had their baby last week," he said after a long silence. "A little girl. They asked me to be her godfather." He swallowed hard. "I said yes, because I knew you would want." "Me too. But seeing her so tiny and perfect, it broke something in me all over again. All those dreams we had, Willa, all those nursery designs I drafted in my head." Tears slid unchecked down his face. "I never told you this, but I blamed myself for our fertility issues in a different way than you blamed yourself. While you questioned your body, I questioned my priorities. I wondered if the stress of my career affected us, if my frequent travel disrupted our timing, if my family history played a role. There's a pattern in my father's family: few children, long gaps between pregnancies. I researched it while you were undergoing all those treatments. I was so focused on being your rock that I never shared my own doubts, never let you comfort me the way I tried to comfort you." The confession, never before voiced aloud, left him feeling oddly unburdened. Stevie wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, suddenly conscious again of the watching woman. She remained at a distance, but something in her posture had changed. A tension, a leaning forward as if straining to hear. Turning back to the headstone, Stevie continued. "A colleague tried to set me up on a date last week." A humorless laugh escaped him. "I nearly fired her on the spot, which was completely irrational. She meant well. Everyone thinks companionship would help." His hand traced the engraved letters of Willa's name. "But they don't understand that I had already found my person. There's no replacement for that, no moving on, just learning to carry the absence." As the afternoon light began to fade, Stevie finally stood, brushing grass from his pants. "I'll be back next Sunday," he promised, as he did each week. "I love you. That hasn't changed. It won't ever change." As he walked toward the cemetery gates, he noticed the watching woman had disappeared. Her absence bothered him more than her presence had, an inexplicable feeling that something significant had just occurred without his knowledge. Over the following weeks, various well-meaning friends attempted to draw Stevie back into social circles. His business partner, David, invited him to family dinners. His college roommate suggested weekend hiking trips. A neighbor offered to set him up with her recently divorced cousin. Stevie declined each invitation with polite firmness. "I'm not ready," became his standard response, though privately he questioned if he would ever be ready to pretend that life continued normally without Willa. One evening, as autumn deepened toward winter, Marcus found Stevie in Willa's home office, a room he had previously avoided. He was sitting at her desk, surrounded by her research papers, a half-empty tumbler of whiskey beside him. "Sir," Marcus began cautiously, "is there anything you need?" Stevie looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Did you know Willa kept journals of all her fertility treatments? Every medication, every procedure, every disappointment, all documented with scientific precision." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Mariu was very thorough in her work." "That's just it," Stevie said, gesturing to the open journal before him. "This isn't work. It's pain. Page after page of hope followed by devastation, and she carried this alone, even when I was right beside her." The household manager remained silent, his expression unreadable. "Her last entry," Stevie continued, turning, A page carefully was the week before I left for Paris. She wrote, "Stevie deserves more than this endless cycle of disappointment. He deserves a family." He looked up at Marcus. "Did she ever say anything to you about feeling like she was failing me?" A moment of hesitation crossed Marcus's usually impassive face. "Mrs. Mariou was concerned about your happiness. She noticed how natural you were with children." "I would have chosen her," Stevie said fiercely. "Every time I would have chosen her over any hypothetical family with someone else." "Perhaps she needed to hear that more explicitly," Marcus suggested quietly. Stevie closed the journal, a new weight of regret settling alongside his grief. "I thought she knew. I should have made sure she knew." 7 months after Willa's death, Stevie continued his Sunday ritual at the cemetery, speaking to her about his discoveries in her journals, apologizing for what he now recognized as his failure to fully communicate his priorities. He wore his wedding ring proudly, turning down any suggestion that he consider dating again with increasing firmness. "There will never be anyone else," he told David when pressed on the subject. "Some people get one great love. Willa was mine." As winter approached, bringing the anniversary of their first meeting, Stevie found himself both dreading and longing for his Sunday visits to the grave, the only time he allowed himself to speak freely about his ongoing love for his wife and the future they had lost. These one-sided conversations became his most honest moments, the only times he felt truly connected to himself and to the memory of the woman who had transformed his life. Willa's heart thundered in her chest as she watched Stevie from a distance that first Sunday. Though she had prepared herself mentally for seeing him again, the reality of his presence, his tall figure bent with grief, the orchids clutched in his hands, struck her with physical force. She had lost weight, his custom suits hanging loosely on his frame. Even from a distance, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights that matched her own. When he began speaking to her headstone, Willa strained to hear his words, catching only fragments carried on the autumn breeze. The raw emotion in his voice, however, required no specific words to convey. This was not a man moving on with his life as she had intended. This was a man shattered by loss, faithful to a memory. She retreated before he could spot her, returning to her small apartment in a daze of conflicting emotions. For hours, she sat motionless, replaying the image of Stevie at her grave, questioning the decision that had led them both to this point of separate suffering. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Willa called the one person who knew her secret. "He's still wearing his wedding ring," she said when Marcus answered, skipping any greeting. A heavy silence followed before Marcus responded. "I told you he wouldn't simply move on." "It's been 7 months," Willa said, her voice catching. "The grief experts say the intense period of mourning typically begins to ease by now." "Grief experts," Marcus echoed with uncharacteristic sarcasm. "Did they account for the particular circumstances of a husband mourning a wife who isn't actually dead?" The rebuke stung, but Willa couldn't argue with its accuracy. "I made a terrible mistake," she admitted. "Then correct it," Marcus urged. "Tell him the truth before more damage is done." But the thought of facing Stevie, of explaining her deception, paralyzed Willa with fear. What if his grief transformed to hatred? What if the love she had witnessed at the cemetery turned to disgust at her manipulation? "I need time," she said finally, "to understand what he's feeling, to find the right way to approach him." Marcus sighed heavily. "He visits every Sunday around 2 o'clock. Always with white orchids, always alone." The following Sunday, Willa returned to the cemetery, positioned where she could hear Stevie's one-sided conversation more clearly. This time, she wore a different disguise, a blonde wig beneath her scarf, sunglasses despite the cloudy day. She watched as Stevie settled beside the headstone with the same careful ritual as before. "The Hong Kong project is almost finished," he told the grave. "The sustainable features we incorporated have already been nominated for an award. You would have appreciated how we integrated healing gardens throughout the hospital complex." His voice, once so confident when discussing his work, sounded hollow to Willa's ears. As he continued talking about his week, she was struck by how he spoke as if she could respond, pausing occasionally as if waiting for a reply only he could hear. After nearly an hour, Stevie's tone shifted to something more vulnerable. "I found your fertility journals," he said, his voice dropping so low that Willa had to strain to hear. "I had no idea how much pain you were in. How could I have missed that? How could I have let you believe, even for a moment, that I needed children more than I needed you?" The raw anguish in his voice pierced Willa's heart. Her elaborate justification that Stevie deserved a chance at fatherhood with someone else crumbled further as she listened to him explicitly reject that very premise. When he finally departed, Willa remained frozen in place, overwhelmed by the realization that her merciful deception had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of Stevie's priorities. The third Sunday, Willa arrived early, selecting a bench where she could observe without being obvious. When Stevie appeared, she was struck by a new detail. He wore the blue tie she had given him for their last anniversary, the one with tiny architectural blueprints embroidered into the silk. As he arranged fresh orchids against the headstone, he began speaking more confidently than in previous visits. "I've been thinking about what you wrote in your journals," he said, "about feeling like you were failing me. I need you to know something, Willa. Even if I could go back and choose a different path, one where I knew we would never have children, I would still choose you. Every time, without hesitation." He paused, running his fingers over the engraved letters of her name. "Our family wasn't just some future possibility that never materialized. You were my family, you still are." Tears streamed down Willa's face beneath her sunglasses. The man before her wasn't mourning lost possibilities of fatherhood. He was mourning her, the partnership they had built, the love they had nurtured. As if sensing her presence, Stevie suddenly looked up, scanning the cemetery. His gaze passed over Willa without recognition, but something in his expression suggested awareness of being watched. After a moment, he returned his attention to the grave. "Someone's here again," he told the headstone. "The same woman from before, I think. It's strange, but something about her reminds me of you." Willa's breath caught in her throat. Had her disguise failed? But Stevie continued his monologue without further comment about the observer, eventually departing with his usual promise to return the following week. The fourth Sunday, Willa gathered her courage and positioned herself closer to Stevie's path. As he passed, she nodded a quiet greeting, which he returned with polite distance. This brief acknowledgement, their first direct interaction in more than 7 months, sent her pulse racing. Stevie's conversation with the headstone that day centered on memories, their first meeting when her car broke down, the weekend at the coastal cottage, the day they moved into their custom-designed home. He recounted these stories with such vivid detail and emotion that Willa realized he had been keeping their relationship alive through careful preservation of these shared experiences. "Remember when you tried to cook traditional Maori food for my mother's visit?" he said with a hint of a smile, the first Willa had seen since her death. "The smoke alarm went off, and we had to open all the windows in February. You refused to admit defeat, though. Ordered everything again the next day and kept trying until you got it right." The memory, one Willa herself treasured, brought a sad smile to her face. Stevie had been so appreciative of her efforts to honor his heritage, never mentioning the wasted ingredients or focusing on her initial failures. As Stevie prepared to leave that day, he passed by Willa's bench again. "This time," he paused. "You come here often," he observed, not quite a question. Willa nodded, keeping her face partially obscured by her scarf. "Every Sunday lately," she replied, deliberately roughening her voice. "Someone important?" Stevie asked, glancing toward the cemetery's other sections. "My husband," Willa improvised. The irony of the truth within her lay not lost on her. Stevie's expression softened with immediate understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Willa managed. "And yours?" "My wife," he replied simply. 7 months ago. "Recently," Willa said softly. "I'm sorry." Stevie glanced back toward Willa's headstone. "Does it get easier?" With time, the question, so innocent yet so loaded with their particular circumstances, momentarily stunned Willa. "Not easier," she finally said. "Different. The grief changes in shape." He nodded as if her answer confirmed something he had suspected. "Thank you for the honesty. Most people try to promise it improves." "Most people mean well," Willa offered. "They do," Stevie agreed, "but they don't understand that some losses redefine you completely." With a final nod, he continued toward the cemetery gates, leaving Willa with the weight of his words pressing against her chest. The 5th Sunday brought a change in routine. Stevie arrived carrying not only orchids, but also a small package wrapped in silver paper. Willa, now positioned where she could clearly hear his words, watched as he placed it carefully beside the flowers. "Happy birthday," he said to the headstone. "I know you said no gifts last year, that experiences matter more than objects, but I couldn't let today pass without acknowledgement." He unwrapped the package himself, revealing a delicate glass orchid, its petals catching the afternoon light. "It's from that glass blower in Murano we visited on our honeymoon," he explained. "I commissioned it months ago before—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Willa's birthday. In the isolation of her self-imposed exile, she had lost track of dates, the days blending together in her Spartan new existence. The realization that Stevie had remembered, had planned ahead with such thoughtfulness, intensified her growing certainty that her deception had been catastrophically misguided. After placing the glass flower, Stevie sat in silence for several minutes before speaking again. "I visited the fertility clinic yesterday," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "I spoke with Dr. Patel about our case. She was surprised to see me, of course, but very kind." Willa leaned forward slightly, her heart racing at this unexpected development. "I wanted to understand better what you went through," Stevie continued. "All those treatments, all those disappointments. Dr. Patel explained everything in detail, the statistical probabilities, the physical toll on your body, the emotional impact that accumulates with each failure." He traced patterns in the grass beside the headstone. "She also told me something I didn't know, something you never shared. That last appointment you had, when she suggested using an egg donor, she said you were devastated, but not just because of what it meant for us. You were devastated because you thought it confirmed that you were broken somehow." His voice caught on the word. "That's the term in your journals too. Broken." Stevie looked up at the sky, blinking rapidly. "You were never broken, Willa, never. You were perfect exactly as you were." The 6th Sunday, Willa deliberately positioned herself directly in Stevie's path as he entered the cemetery. When he approached, she stood, making eye contact behind her sunglasses. "We meet again," she said, her disguised voice steadier than she felt. Stevie nodded in recognition. "The Sunday ritual," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "May I walk with you a bit?" Willa asked impulsively. "Sometimes it helps to have company, even silent company." A flicker of surprise crossed his features before he nodded. "I'd welcome that, actually." They walked in silence to Willa's headstone, where Stevie arranged his weekly offering of orchids. Willa stood slightly apart, watching as he completed his ritual with practiced movements. "My wife loved orchids," he explained, seemingly feeling a need to justify the expensive flowers to his silent companion. I used to surprise her with them for no reason. Now there's only this reason. They're beautiful, Willa offered, and meaningful clearly. Stevie settled on the grass, gesturing for Willa to join him if she wished. After a moment's hesitation, she sat nearby, close enough for conversation but maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you talk to him?" Stevie asked. "Your husband, when you visit?" Willa nodded. "Sometimes, though it feels a bit foolish." "It shouldn't," Stevie said with conviction. "I've had more honest conversations with this headstone than I've had with living people lately. There's no judgment here, no awkward attempts to change the subject when grief becomes uncomfortable." "What do you tell her?" Willa asked, her heart pounding at her boldness. A sad smile crossed Stevie's face. "Everything, work developments, family news, but mostly, I tell her all the things I should have said more clearly when she was alive." He glanced at Willa. "That's the cruelty of death, isn't it? The sudden clarity about what truly matters, arriving too late to be useful." "What would you tell her if you could?" Willa asked, unable to stop herself. "If she could hear you just once more." Stevie was quiet for so long that Willa feared she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and intense. "I would tell her that she was never a means to an end, never just the potential mother of my children. She was my destination, my home." He looked directly at Willa, his gaze piercing even through her sunglasses. "I would tell her that loving her was the best choice I ever made, and that I would make it again, regardless of the outcome." Something in his direct gaze made Willa wonder if he somehow sensed who she was beneath her disguise. But the moment passed, and Stevie returned his attention to the headstone. "And you?" he asked. "What would you tell your husband?" The question, innocent yet devastating in its irony, momentarily robbed Willa of speech. When she finally answered, her words came straight from her heart. "That I made a terrible mistake," she said softly. "That I thought I was setting him free, but I was really running from my own fears of inadequacy." Stevie turned to her, a curious expression on his face. "That's specific," Willa quickly added. "I mean, that's what I imagine many widows might feel, regret for things unsaid or undone." He studied her for a moment longer before nodding slowly. "Yes, regret is a constant companion in grief, isn't it?" They sat in silence for several more minutes before Willa rose to leave, feeling increasingly unsettled by their conversation. As she turned to go, Stevie spoke again. "Will I see you next Sunday?" he asked, an unidentifiable emotion coloring his voice. "Yes," Willa replied without hesitation. "I'll be here." The 7th Sunday dawned clear and cold, the first hint of winter, sharpening the air. Willa dressed with particular care, selecting clothing that would keep her warm during what she expected would be a longer cemetery visit. This time, she wore only minimal disguise, the blonde wig and sunglasses, but no scarf concealing her face. When she arrived, Stevie was already at the headstone, arranging orchids with meticulous attention. As she approached, he looked up, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something else, crossing his features. "Good afternoon," he greeted her, his voice warmer than in previous encounters. "Hello," Willa replied, settling beside him with the growing familiarity of their strange Sunday ritual. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Stevie spoke. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about what we would tell our spouses if given one more chance." Willa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "It's made me realize something," Stevie continued. "I've been talking to this headstone for months, but I've been telling Willa these things all along, in my heart, in my thoughts." He traced the engraved letters of her name. "I think she knows how much I loved her, how much I still love her." His use of the past tense when referring to her, "she knows," struck Willa with unexpected force. Perhaps Stevie was finally beginning to process his grief in healthier ways. That's a beautiful thought, she offered, that our loved ones somehow know our hearts, even after they're gone. Stevie turned to face her directly. What about you? Do you think your husband knows how you feel? The question hung between them, charged with meanings Stevie couldn't possibly understand. Willa took a deep breath, gathering courage for what she was about to say. I hope so, she began carefully. But I've been thinking, what if he wasn't gone? What if, hypothetically, he could come back? Stevie's expression grew very still. What do you mean? If you could have her back, Willa asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it, would you take her, even after everything? Stevie's face darkened with sudden anger. That's a cruel question. I'm sorry, Willa said quickly. I didn't mean... No one comes back, Stevie interrupted, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Entertaining such hypotheticals only prolongs the pain. Willa swallowed hard, recognizing she had approached this all wrong. You're right, I apologize. They sat in uncomfortable silence until Willa, desperate to salvage the moment, spoke again. Perhaps I asked because I think I've developed feelings for you over these Sundays together. The words, meant as a bridge to eventual truth, landed with devastating impact. Stevie stood abruptly, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. I will never love again, he stated flatly. It wouldn't be fair to anyone. My heart died with Willa, the conviction in his voice, the absolute loyalty it represented, finally broke through Willa's remaining rationalizations. With trembling hands, she removed her sunglasses, then slowly reached up to remove the blonde wig. Stevie, she said softly, her natural voice replacing the disguised one she had used in their previous encounters. It's me. Chapter 9. The revelation time stopped as Stevie stared at the woman before him, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. Willa, his Willa, alive and breathing, her familiar features now unmistakable without the disguise. No, he whispered, stumbling backward. This isn't possible. Stevie, please. Willa reached for him, but he recoiled from her touch. You're dead, he stated flatly, as if reminding himself of an established fact. I got the call. I read your letter. I mourned you for 7 months. I'm not dead, Willa said softly. I never was. It was a deception. The word hung in the air between them, its inadequacy painfully apparent. Stevie's expression transformed from shock to confusion, then to a dawning comprehension that sent him staggering back another step. A deception? He repeated, his voice hollow. You made me believe you had died, deliberately? Willa nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was doing the right thing, setting you free to find someone who could give you children. I was so wrong, Stevie, so terribly wrong. The color drained from Stevie's face as the full implications crashed over him. The death certificate, the cremation. Marcus... His voice trailed off as pieces clicked into place. Marcus knew. He helped me. Yes, reluctantly. Stevie's legs seemed to give way beneath him. He sank to his knees on the grass, his breathing ragged. Willa moved toward him instinctively, but his raised hand stopped her. Don't, he warned, his voice unrecognizable. Don't touch me. Stevie, please, let me explain, Willa pleaded, kneeling a few feet away from him. Explain? A bitter laugh escaped him. Explain how you watched me grieve for months, how you listened to me pour my heart out at an empty grave. His voice rose with each question. How you pretended to be a stranger offering comfort while knowing exactly who I was mourning. I didn't know how to tell you, Willa whispered. Each week I came hoping to find the courage. Courage? Stevie's eyes flashed with anger. You had the courage to orchestrate your own death, but not to face me with the truth. His words cut deeper than Willa had anticipated. I was afraid, she admitted, afraid you would hate me for what I'd done. Well, congratulations, Stevie said, rising unsteadily to his feet. That fear was entirely justified. With those devastating words, he turned and walked away, his back rigid with suppressed emotion. Willa remained kneeling before her own headstone, watching the man she loved disappear through the cemetery gates. The world tilted beneath her as the full weight of her actions crashed down. This wasn't the reunion she had imagined during those 7 Sundays of listening to Stevie bare his soul. There was no relief in his eyes, no joy at discovering she was alive, only betrayal and pain that she had inflicted. Eventually, as shadows lengthened across the cemetery, Willa gathered her discarded disguise and made her way back to her small apartment. The space, already Spartan, now felt like a prison of her own making. She moved through it in a daze, replaying Stevie's expression of shock and revulsion. Her phone remained silent that evening and through the night. Though she hadn't really expected Stevie to call, each passing hour without contact deepened her despair. Sleep eluded her entirely, leaving her to face the dawn with burning eyes and a hollowed heart. By mid-morning, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Willa dialed Marcus's number. "He knows," she said when he answered. A heavy sigh came through the line. "I'm aware. He arrived here last night in a state I've never witnessed before." "Is he—" Willa couldn't finish the question. "He's broken, Mrs. Mariu," Marcus said bluntly, "more completely than when he thought you were dead. Then he had grief, but also beautiful memories, untainted by deception. Now he questions everything you ever shared." Willa pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "I need to see him, to explain properly." "I don't think that would be wise right now," Marcus cautioned. "He's asked me to pack his essentials. He's leaving for the Wellington project site this afternoon. New Zealand, his mother's homeland, thousands of miles away. For how long?" Willa managed to ask. "He didn't specify," Marcus replied, his tone softening slightly. "But I believe distance is necessary for him to process this." After ending the call, Willa sat motionless, staring at the wall. The magnitude of her miscalculation, the irreparable damage she had inflicted, settled around her like a shroud. She had believed herself to be making a noble sacrifice, setting Stevie free to find happiness without her. Instead, she had shattered the foundation of trust upon which their entire relationship had been built. Days passed with no word from Stevie. Willa returned to her research position at the small hospital, moving through her duties like an automaton. Colleagues noticed her distraction, but attributed it to ongoing adjustment to a new workplace. In the evenings, she drafted letters to Stevie, explanations, apologies, pleas for understanding, but sent none of them, knowing words on paper could never bridge the chasm she had created. 2 weeks after their confrontation at the cemetery, her doorbell rang unexpectedly. Heart racing, she opened it to find not Stevie but his mother, Anahera Mariu, standing in the hallway. "Mrs. Mariu," Willa gasped, unconsciously backing away. "May I come in?" Anahera asked, her expression unreadable. Willa nodded, stepping aside to admit her mother-in-law. The older woman surveyed the sparse apartment with keen eyes before settling on the single chair by the window. "I thought you were in New Zealand." "With Stevie," Willa said, remaining standing. "I was," Anahera confirmed. "I came when Marcus called to tell me my son's dead wife had miraculously reappeared." Her tone was measured, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "I needed to see for myself." Willa flinched at the description. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered. "And yet you succeeded spectacularly," Anahera observed, her Maori accent becoming more pronounced with emotion. "In our Maori culture, wānau, family, is sacred. What you did violated not just your marriage, but the concept of wakapapa, our connection to ancestors and descendants. Your actions broke the spiritual threads that bind us across generations." Anahera touched the punamu pendant at her neck, the jade stone that had been passed through her family for generations. "When Stevie thought you died, he performed traditional tangi rituals for you, grieving ceremonies that lasted for days. He even had a traditional moko kawe artist incorporate symbols representing you into a small tattoo over his heart. These are not casual gestures for us. They are sacred commitments to honor those we've lost. I know, Willa acknowledged, tears threatening again. I convinced myself I was setting him free to find happiness with someone who could give him children. Anahira's expression softened fractionally. My son told me about your fertility struggles, about the pain you carried. It doesn't excuse what I did, Willa said quietly. No, it doesn't, Anahira agreed. But it helps me understand the desperation behind your choice. She studied Willa intently. Stevie is staying at our family home in Wellington. He's redesigning the entire East Wing, though the original was perfectly fine. Keeping his hands busy while his heart heals, or tries to. Hope flickered briefly in Willa's chest. Could he ever forgive me? Anahira considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust is. You took his choice away, Willa. You decided what would make him happy without consulting him. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than infidelity ever could. Willa nodded, understanding the truth in her mother-in-law's words. He doesn't know I'm here, Anahira continued. I came because, despite everything, you're still my daughter-in-law, and I needed to understand what could drive a woman I respected to such an extreme action. And now that you've seen me, Willa asked hesitantly. Anahira rose, crossing to where Willa stood. With unexpected gentleness, she took Willa's face between her hands. I see someone who has punished herself far more effectively than anyone else could. Someone who made a catastrophic mistake born of love and insecurity, not malice. She released Willa with a sigh. But I also see the mountain you must climb if you ever hope to rebuild what you destroyed. Before leaving, Anahira paused at the door. One last thing. Stevie doesn't yet know this, but I received some family medical records he requested months ago. There's a history of male factor fertility issues in our lineage. His great-grandfather, his uncle, several men who had children only after years of trying, if at all. She met Willa's stunned gaze steadily. He was blaming himself too. The revelation struck Willa with physical force. All this time, while she had been internalizing their fertility struggles as her failure, Stevie had been harboring the same fear. After Anahira's departure, Willa sat for hours processing everything she had learned. The irony of their parallel self-blame might have been almost comical in different circumstances. Now, it only underscored the tragic miscommunication that had led them here, each shouldering responsibility alone instead of sharing their fears. Days later, Willa received a small package in the mail. Inside was a key with a note in Marcus's handwriting. Mr. Mariu has authorized me to grant you access to the house to collect your personal belongings. He will be away for at least another month. The key felt impossibly heavy in her palm, both an opportunity and a confirmation of Stevie's continued absence. After careful consideration, Willa decided to visit their home, not just for possessions, but to reconnect with the life she had abandoned. Entering the house for the first time in more than 7 months sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. Everything remained exactly as she remembered, preserved as if awaiting her return. In the living room, family photos still displayed their wedding day, their honeymoon, their housewarming. Her books still lined the shelves, her favorite throw still draped across the couch where she had spent countless evenings reading, while Stevie sketched architectural designs. Moving through each room, Willa collected items she needed: clothing, important documents, cherished mementos. In their bedroom, she found Stevie's pillow on her side of the bed, as if he had slept holding it in her absence. The discovery brought fresh tears. As she prepared to leave, Willa found herself drawn to the nursery, the room that had symbolized both their hopes and their heartbreak. She hesitated at the threshold, surprised to find it no longer empty except for that single rocking chair. In the months since her death, Stevie had finished the room. Soft green walls now complemented natural wood furniture. A beautifully crafted crib stood by the window, and above it hung a mobile of delicate glass orchids, catching the afternoon light. The completed nursery told a story Willa hadn't anticipated, not of a man moving on and building a family with someone new, but of a man honoring what might have been. The realization both warmed and devastated her. On impulse, Willa settled into the rocking chair and withdrew a small notebook from her bag. For the next hour, she wrote without pause, not an explanation or justification, but a complete and unvarnished truth. She documented her spiral into despair, her misguided plan, her months of exile, and most importantly, the revelations of the cemetery Sundays when she had finally understood the depth of her mistake. When finished, she placed the notebook on the crib's small shelf, tucking a single page into its cover. The page contained only 3 lines. "I took away your choice before. I won't do that again. If you want to speak with me, I'll be waiting. If you don't, I will understand." Beneath these words, she wrote her address and phone number, then quietly left the house, locking the door behind her. Back in her apartment, Willa faced the stark reality of her situation. She had revealed herself to Stevie, but the outcome was nothing like she had imagined. In a gesture of penance and cultural acknowledgement, she called her mother in Ghana to discuss atonement rituals from their tradition. Following her mother's guidance, Willa spent 3 days in prayer and fasting, wearing white as was customary during periods of spiritual cleansing. She prepared traditional Ghanaian akpeteshie libations to honor ancestors and seek their wisdom in healing the breach her deception had created. These rituals, connecting her to generations of women before her, provided solace, but no certainty about her future. Now all she could do was wait, for forgiveness that might never come, for a chance she might not deserve. Exactly 1 month after leaving her notebook in the nursery, Willa returned home from work to find someone waiting outside her apartment building. Her heart nearly stopped as she recognized Stevie's tall figure, leaning against a car with his arms crossed. He looked different, thinner, his familiar features sharper, a new gravity in his expression. He straightened as she approached, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stopped her several paces away. "Stevie," she breathed, afraid to move closer, afraid to hope. "Willa," he acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "I read your notebook." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I have questions," he continued, "many questions, and I can't promise where this will lead, but I'm here." "That's more than I deserve," Willa managed to say. "This isn't about what either of us deserves," Stevie replied, a flicker of his old warmth briefly animating his features. "It's about what's true and what happens next." He gestured to the building's entrance. "Can we talk?" "Yes," Willa said, hope cautiously unfurling in her chest. "We can talk." As she led him up to her apartment, Willa understood that this was neither an ending nor a beginning. It was simply the next step in a journey that had taken them both through grief and deception to this moment of uncertain possibility. When he regained consciousness moments later, his first words were, "Am I alive or dreaming?" "You're not dreaming," Willa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was setting you free." Chapter 10. Rebirth. 4 weeks after their reunion, Willa experiences unusual symptoms. Having abandoned hope years before, she doesn't recognize them as signs of pregnancy until Stevie insists she see a doctor. The news is confirmed. Against all odds, Willa is pregnant. The final chapter spans the pregnancy, with Stevie attending every appointment, designing a nursery, and reading to Willa's growing belly each night. 9 months later, Willa gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The story concludes with them in the hospital room, Stevie holding both babies while Willa watches with tears of joy. Sometimes, Stevie tells her, the things we think are broken just need time to heal. Their story becomes known in their community, not just for the miraculous pregnancy, but as testimony to love strong enough to overcome even the most desperate deception.